all systems go. Clear for liftoff. What's up, everyone? Tyler Tamboline here, aka ToeTagginTambo, back for another edition of Leverage Lane, PGA DFS edition here on the Ship It Nation YouTube station. We did get through the technical difficulties, so we appreciate you guys hanging out there with us for a few minutes. Make sure to hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. If you're watching on mobile, just turn off the live chat for 2 seconds with the X, hit the thumb, let it pop back up. It helps us out a ton. Alex, we got her figured out, man. At the grandparents' house. So, it happens. It happens, my man. How you doing?
Yeah. Kind of have it figured out. Still wasn't able to use my actual camera. So we're using the laptop camera. We're standing up in a random room because all the other rooms were taken. My brother and his fiance are also here, and she has what my grandfather would call a real job. So I get booted to finding the stranded place, and here we are. It's gonna be fun anyway.
Back to the real job, baby. Let's go. We got the Genesis Invitational this week. We're back to the Riv. We love that. So we're going to talk all through the course fit, the weather. This show is not who to play, it is how to play. We're definitely going to talk more about that. We'll talk about the chalk build from a single entry perspective, how we can leverage that. A little bit on the Scottie conversation. Again, as usual, we'll have one and done betting segment at the end. Alex and I will get to our lane for the week and how we're handling things. And I'll start here, Alex, just recapping from last week coming into this week. This week still does have a modified cut. I know a lot of people from the no cut. Now it's like this. They think of it as, it's kind of like a no cut though, right? No, because we've definitely seen guys miss the cut in this. What is it? Top 50 and ties anybody within 10 of 72 total golfers. Got that right?
Yes.
Okay. What's your first thoughts on that? Because go ahead.
It might just be 50 without the qualifier of being within 10 of the lead. I can't
remove that actually now that you say that. Yeah.
But regardless, like we know it's a cut that most guys should make, but it's not a cut that everyone is going to make. And the fact that the cut exists, like it's just a great addition to the tournament, makes it much better than the other signature events.
Yeah, we'll go back to last week just for a second. We always start with this. Remember, guys, if you're watching this on replay or playback, if you're live here with us, we appreciate you. But if you're watching it on playback, leave a comment. Let us know any questions you have or anything that you got from this episode once we get through it that was thought-provoking. This show is meant to be evergreen with review, application, and the actual slate at hand so that you can take it into the week ahead, which is what's exciting. Single entry, GPP Focus. We will have some MME coverage as well. But just going back to it here, I do want to just show this comment from last week. This is the winner from last week, Mike Thomas. You can reach out for a free week. It says, is there an optimal number of rounds played when conducting the statistical analysis on a golfer so that you're grabbing the best possible picture of what a golfer is actually doing versus what they've done? And you chimed in right away, said, love this one. I thought this was a good topic for next week, which is this week today. What was your thoughts on this when you first saw it? And then how do you want to handle answering this?
Yeah, I really like this question for a couple of reasons. The first is just, it's a very well thought out question of, okay, and a well-motivated question too, right? Like we always love the questions that are about someone improving their own process and allowing them to do their own research and really come to their own conclusions, which is a really valuable thing in DFS because it's naturally going to put you on some contrarian things. If all you're doing is getting your information and your plays from somebody else, you're automatically getting more popular plays that way. So I like the motivation of this question. I like the thought process of this question. And then I also think it has a really interesting answer, which is not every skill set should be treated the same. When people build models out, a very common thing to do is across the board, I'm going to take their last, let's say 60 rounds and blend it with their last 12 or something like that. Right. And that's not how golf works. Driving especially is more predictive in small samples. So you can add more and more recent form into driving. You don't want to do that with putting because with putting, you need at least 44 rounds worth of data before it's even remotely stable. So it's a really cool question and it has a really unique answer, and that makes it really fun to talk about.
Yeah, I think it's solid. I mean, anything else from last week that you wanted to bring up? I know we sort of went through everything here on the show. The Scottie situation, again, is definitely going to come up today, so we can kind of lean there for a second. This is the funny part, right? Scottie, if the whole world watches the same thing. If Scottie just played well on Thursdays, he'd win every tournament. Right. But there's a butterfly effect. What if he this week he could play amazing on Thursday and finish worse than the last two events? He's like, oh, I thought if he just played well on Thursdays, he would crush it. No, it's not how it works. There's a butterfly effect to it. He played bad on Thursday, played amazing on Sunday, and everything in between. It's still Scottie Scheffler. But obviously the stats with him, everything that we know and how good he is as a whole, it'd be great if he played good every day for the Scottie backers. It's not always good for the faders, but that's why there's showdown contests as well, right? You can get in on the action that way. Is there anything else you want to take away last week's thoughts? I thought, that episode had a lot of people come back and say solid stuff around everything that we went through there. Anything just that you had that came to mind from last week on a review purpose?
Yeah, I think one of the other things that really kind of caught me by surprise was Justin Rose's ownership. And I want to talk to this a little bit because I have never, been on shows of the magnitude of this one, and with Pat Mayo that I've been doing every Tuesday, where I actually have to include like who I'm talking about as a variable for my own ownership projections. Right. And I've always included like watching shows and taking note of who's talking about which player. That has always been a part of my ownership process. Now I just have to put myself in that sample. And I think it's always like really difficult to know what would Rose have been if we didn't talk about Rose last week, if I hadn't talked about him on Pat's show as well. My guess is that he wasn't going to be 8% like we were kind of hoping for anyway, but he might have been 12 or 13 instead of the 21% that he got to in single entries. And he also was like the second most popular one and done play. So that was just an interesting thing and something I want to talk through with you, because you have obviously been on shows of this magnitude for years. And so how have you kind of navigated that thought of what I say is going to affect the landscape, and just like, number one, how impactful do you think it is? And then number two, how does it change the way that you view ownership and what you expect from the field?
I think a couple just, this is why this show's fun. It's kind of like buddies talking, think about this stuff on the fly. I think it actually impacts it way less than we think. We do live in a bubble, but I think actually what matters more is like certain angles. And I'll say it like this, because we've obviously had deep conversations on this very show. The weather angle thing is one that really drives it. Like, you have to adjust your projections. You have to adjust your ownership. I know you do it for yourself over at FTN. We do it over at Ship It Nation. The squad is all over that. Rest in peace to the big guy in the sky, DGen. But when he would hop on the emergency stream on Wednesday night, first of all, that's a show that we all miss, and I let people talk about it all the time. There's no way to replicate James. Unfortunately, we would all rather him be here. Trust me. I know I get a lot of people saying that. It's like we're trying to do the best we can to honor the guy and do it through other shows and things that we're doing. His team is still over at Ship It Nation doing the content as well. But that type of situation where he would come on the emergency stream and say, okay, I'm seeing this weather edge. It wasn't just the picks and the one guy he's on and all that stuff. It was oftentimes how you're viewing the slate. Another one is a skill set. I know you were just talking about it in a different perspective, but if you came on this week, and it would be the Blickle effect, as somebody said there, I think that's a good one, right? If that happens, but if you came on this week and said, look, man, it's wet, I'm taking the easy route here. I'm just going to target all bombers. It's Riv, it's wet, it's soaked. I'm going to do it this way. They should be able to hit more greens. Around the greens, not going to be as important. I'm not saying this is what you're going to say or anybody is. I'm just saying that I find has a way bigger effect than a pick or a play. Obviously, a little bit of a boost here, a little bit of a boost there, it will happen. But I think to your original point and kind of the former point that you'd made was you were already taking shows into consideration, even when you weren't on certain shows or maybe not considering other ones. I think that matters a whole lot more. And then secondly, really quick, because some of it's baked in, yes, most cases it is always baked in for like good projections and ownership like you talk about. But just from a general speaking standpoint, the projections really drive it a lot more too. So when people say, well, how did this value play get pumped so hard? Well, if you look at Data Golf and Establish the Run and all these other sites that people are trusting as the number one source, that must be the best projections. Everyone says it is. Not always the case, but just noting it, it's like for ownership specifically, certain things like that. But those are driving factors, again, even more than what we might say on these shows. That can just add to it. So if someone was already leaning there, now it can push them a little bit further. Hopefully that gives you some sort of context on how I think about it.
Yeah, I agree a lot there. And I think one of the thoughts I had with Rose was like, obviously not everything that we say is going to resonate with people as much as the next thing that we say. And I think perhaps the driving force with Rose last week was the fact that we pointed out that like there was this very clear divide in ownership projections where the guys who had already played really well this year were the ones who were popular, and that really played out, right? So like think of Rory and Tommy. They both moonwalked to like 5% or less in some of the bigger single entries just because they hadn't played. And what we pointed out about Rose was Rose actually fits the bill of somebody who's played really good golf already this year, but he's not projected to be owned anywhere near as much as some of the other guys who have played really good golf. And so I think immediately people just like bought into that thought of, oh, I can get the guy who's in great form, playing great golf at the ownership as if he hasn't been playing this year. And so I think it was just one of those things where we found something that really resonated with people with Rose, and that's why it seems so much. And it's not just because like whatever we say is going to catch on.
Agreed, 100%. The last thing I'll say on that part is just to earlier in the season, like you've probably heard me talk about this on these very shows in the past as well. And I don't think last week was necessarily one, so I'm not rating it based off of that. But there is most certainly what I call, quote unquote, lazy weeks, where it means the content is driving the picks and the plays and that sort of stuff even more than usual, because people are saying, look, man, it's the Super Bowl week. I don't got much to do. Not last week, but just noting like that week as an example. I'm just going to do this the week before a major, or especially after a major. It's like, all right, the Masters did or didn't go my way, but I had a ton of money invested, most likely, because the average person is putting more in because the bigger tournaments and all that. Good, bad, or the ugly, if you win, you're on a high. It doesn't mean sometimes when you're on a high, you pay attention less. You're just feeling it, right? That momentum feeling. So if you lose a bunch or more than you plan to lose, like, again, people can sometimes play outside their limits. I highly recommend against that, but just noting it, that's where sometimes people say, screw it. This week, I'm just going to play a little less, listen to a couple podcasts and go with it. And then you see the ownership condense that much more.
Yeah. And I think the other point there, it's not even so much that it's a lazy week, but I think we've talked about this already, but like we have a bunch of people with PGA DFS who are DFS players who want to keep playing DFS. So they try PGA for the first time. Whereas like at the start of the NFL season, it's a bunch of NFL fans who are trying a new game. So this time it's people who've already played the game, just trying to apply it to a new sport. And so they're familiar with DFS. They're less familiar with the actual players and who's good and what should I care about. And so they hear, oh, this is a very good player who might be low owned. They instinctively know, okay, low owned guys who have winning equity, that's a very valuable play. And so I think it's something just about Rose that really resonated with people and less about just the fact that we were talking about him.
Yeah, just knowing this too, in high stakes, I agree with everything you just said there, but in the higher stakes, smaller fields, even like what we're talking about, typically applying it to like the $100 single entry with 15K or the $200 single entry with 50K, like those are just contests we're playing weekly, one or the other or both. And to me, that's a setup where that's almost the opposite effect, to be honest, because it's actually not as much. I know sometimes some of the nosebleeds players that we talk with, my guy Kenny, things like that, it's like these lineups you can just figure out off the projection. So those are just so built. Someone's like, how did Bridgman get to this percentage or whatever? Go look at what his projection is at the most popular projection sites, and there you go. That's your answer. So it's like that's the benefit of us doing a show like this and why we wanted to do it, because we're seeing it from all angles. We're seeing what you might not see. Not everybody watching this show even has ownership projections or player point projections from any site outside of maybe one of ours or both of ours versus the competitors. So it's like we can see it all and then talk through it. And that's the benefit of that. I did want to cover one more thing because I didn't have a lot on that comment. Again, I think it was a really good one from Mike Thomas. You handled it quite well and liked it. So I wanted to get your take on it. I agree on everything you said on that one. We'll see if we agree on everything this week. We don't always, but just noting it before we get to the Genesis, I want to have a quick conversation on this. And I'm trying to bring like a DFS tip every week or like something from Mastermind or good discussion I saw in the Discord. And did you see, I know it's a single entry show, but have you seen last week and this week, the $5 Drive the Green contest on DraftKings? Did you get a chance to check it out? It's very solid, but I'll just get a quick thought from you on it. And then I'll go into my point. What did you see, sir? What stood out to you?
Well, why don't you actually start? Because I saw a couple people in my Discord actually talking about it. So
the main thing is it's a $5 MME contest, which people love. But typically in the past, it's been like 20% or more to first, or like really bad payout structure. Maybe sometimes they pay 25 to 30% of the field, which I know some people like that. I'm just saying, obviously that hurts what can happen up top if they're going to pay $8 to everybody at the bottom. So what they kind of did, it looks like roughly around 20% of the field is paid. They went with 10% to first, 30,000, and 10% of first, I believe, to 10th for 3,000, but it's a 30K, 10K which I'm fine with, by the way. I still like the break. It's like first is worth more than second, but second and down is still really solid. 10th is still 10 of first. You're still getting less people paid, so your min cash is more. Like it's all very solid. So it's not even about structure. Everyone knows what they like in structure by now. I think DFS is advanced in the year 2026 enough where people kind of understand that's a good contest based on looking at that. But I actually want to talk about it from another angle. And I don't want to say like be dramatic and say this is dangerous. I'm just noting it as like, I think there's a trap people fall into. And I wanted to discuss it because I do one-on-one calls and mentorship and things like that. And I got the mastermind project and all the members over at Ship It Nation. You see this in your Discord, I'm sure. But I saw a lot of people say, man, what a great tournament. I better MME this week. And it's like, I really do caution against that because if you always play single entry, I wouldn't just let a good contest structure make you all of a sudden an MME player. Vice versa, I wouldn't say if I'm an MME player, I just automatically run and play a higher dollar single entry. I really do think you should let the week come to you. And I think what I mean by that is this is a 72 person contest or like golfers in this tournament. If you like 3 golfers in the 9K range, 3 in the 8, 10 in the 7, you can probably build a pretty solid single entry or a 3 max or play it like a single entry or whatever. You don't have an angle you're attacking. You don't have really anything. And I know some people will say more lineups, the better. I'm not saying for or against that. I'm just saying I actually think it can be costly to some people. Like they get into that. They actually have a decent core. They kind of just had a structured core. They spray and pray on their remaining spots and their best finish in the $5 like 1/30th. And it pays nothing. And they might get back a little bit of their money or may lose a little bit of their money. They could have built a really strong single entry that doubles that same amount of money on one lineup in the $200 single, but really gave them a shot at 50K. And I think that's the difference where people don't look at that stuff enough to say like the 50K could really change. 30 and 50, both awesome. 10K for second, awesome. I get all that. It's all good on $200 either way. But 40 lineups in the $5, when you have no process for that, you don't even know how to really use an optimizer, and you're doing it just based on contest structure, something can be a good contest structure, and it doesn't mean it's good for you. So just keep that in mind. You can find good contest structures for you. And so I don't know, I'll get your thoughts on that, but I just think it's something that people get caught in a trap a little bit of letting the contest dictate their week, but they really have the feeling of a good single entry already built or ready in their mind.
Yes, I very much agree with your larger point. And I think the way I would phrase it is I'm always looking for the best contests of the contest type that I already play and that I like. And only when I don't have the kind of contest that I actually want, do I then look for, okay, well, what else can I play this week? So it's not about like how good the contests are outside of what I want to do. It's just, do I have contests that I like playing and that, really fit my own strategy?
Yeah, and I'll add one more point because we try and wrap up the first 20 minutes to get on to Genesis. But you've said this before, and I want to re-hit this because, again, not everybody goes back and watches every episode or they think it's only for the week at hand. We've had a ton of evergreen content. Even if you just watch the first 20 minutes of the episode, you're gonna gain a ton. But just this, it's stuff like this. And one thing you've said too, that just you said it again in a different way, is a lot of people go after the satellites for a MME contest, and it's like you only typically play single entry. You told me you don't feel good about MME. You don't know what to do. You don't know how to use an optimizer. You're uncertain. And then when you get 18 tickets, you struggle through it. You've said this yourself. You won't even look at like a mega necessarily for something that's a mega with a 5,000. So I'm not saying you wouldn't do it, but it's like, that's different to you. You'd rather for the 44 with 600 or 700 people where you can exploit it. It's against less pro entries, etc. Even though they're big boy buy-ins and they're big prize pool, $1 million prizes for first, etc., it's still better for you to go after the 44 ticket by the way you typically play and sticking to your guns to not only win that satellite, but then be able to typically apply a very similar approach to the tournament you're about to take it into when you do win it, are fortunate enough to win a seat into it. I don't know if you want to add to that, but you've definitely said that in the past and you just kind of said it again too.
Yeah, I mean, unfortunately, like there aren't, large dollar single entries that you can satellite into. But yes, I very much try and target the megas that, they have, that I only have to beat 600, 700 people rather than going for like the Wildcat where I need to beat 3,000 people. Or, I don't do any of the like 10-cent qualifiers, 10-cent satellites trying to get into the $20, milli where I have to beat 150,000 or something like that. So yeah, very much agree with that. The second thing I wanted to say about the $5, there are things that I really like about it. So you mentioned it's 10% to first. The $25 for comparison is 20% to first. Now, the main effect of that is in the $25, you have $200,000 going to first place. You have $6,000 going to 10th place. So a really, really small percentage. In the $5, you have 30,000 going to first. You have 3,000 going to 10th. That's kind of the structure that I like. I want to see top heavy contests, but at the top, I want them to be flat, if that makes sense. So what we see there is 10th gets 10% of what first place gets. If 10th was getting 10% of what first place got in the $25, they'd be getting $20,000. Instead, they only get $6,000. So that's an indicator of, okay, this is really, really top heavy, even at the top. And when you have to beat 47,000 other people, that's when it becomes, it's not that the expected value changes. It's just the likelihood of actually realizing whatever edge you have in that contest is extremely, extremely low. So I like the $5 more, but there are still things about the $5 that I don't like. So for example, you get 2x for a min cash. Now, I think the casual DFS player, most DFS players will like that because they like, making something that seems at least a little bit significant when you min cash. For context, the $25 1.6x for a min cash. So it doesn't feel as good when you min cash, but in the long run, min cashing doesn't affect you. Your min cash rate at the end of the year is not going to define whether you had a profitable season, a losing season, whatever. Your min cash rate is going to be irrelevant. All that's going to matter is how often did you finish in the top 1%, and when you finished in the top 1%, did you get lucky and get the takedown, or did you have to settle for second place and $10,000 instead of $30,000, something like that. So the point there being, when you see 2x to min cash, it's like that feels good when you min cash, but that's still a considerable amount of money that could have instead been going to the top and going to the outcomes that you're really chasing and optimizing your lineups for. So maybe it could have been like 35,000 to first and 3,500 to 10th if they went with the 1.6x min cash. Maybe it's not that powerful. Maybe it's even more, I'd have to actually do the math, but
yeah,
it's worth pointing out that is the $5 a good contest? Yes. Is it some magical contest that you're going to make money in just because you play it because it's structured well? Absolutely not. It's a 15.9% rake, for example. That's still a big rake. If they came out with a $5 that was 5% rake, and now it's 1.5x to min cash, and there's so much money at the top, but it's flat at the top. Now maybe you can make a case that even if you don't MME, you should play it because the rake is less than usual, and so it's more likely that you find whatever edge you have. Sure, but as long as the rake is the same and min cash is getting this much, again, it's not some magical contest where you're going to profit just because you played. You're still most likely going to lose money playing it.
Yeah, I mean, I'll agree with all that. That's why I said people have to recognize that. But I think just when people can put themselves in that spot, now I got to switch it up this week because there's a contest I really like. One, it'll probably exist again. It was just here last week. It's here again now. It's filling quickly. All the contests are. The demand is there for PGA DFS. Just keep that in mind. One other thing I'm going to plug now and quickly note is just that's another thing about if you are playing MME, we focus on single entry, but the portfolio diversification. Now, this is only in starter packages or above, but that's another trap I'm just going to point out is when people say, oh, I can't believe in the $20 or the $25 MME, you got to come, at least top 5 to get your money back. It's not really true because anybody that's building that with an optimizer that has some sort of, in this case, there's simulations built in and we're using portfolio diversification, your portfolio is probably going to be lined up to where you're not just going to get one strong finish. It's going to be a portfolio of finishes. And to Alex's point of the min cashes, the 1.6x's, the things, those all start to add up on top of the big finish. You're going to be more disappointed that you came 10th for 6,000 and you're like, damn, I was 9 spots away from 194,000 more dollars in that tournament. Obviously that's going to sting more than that. All right, let's move on. Let's get to this week. Let's talk a little bit about this. We are back at Riv. We've got some weather coming in. Where do you want to kick this thing off with course fit and weather as we usually do? What do you got for us on that?
Yeah, let's start with course fit because I think this is a pretty kind of fun discussion and it leads to some interesting strategy as well. So this course fit model is a really strong one. It's a really reliable one. One of the reasons why it's as strong and reliable as it is because we've had pretty consistent conditions, especially over the last 3 or 4 years here. This is very consistently, Riviera has very consistently had some of the firmest greens on tour, and the firmness of those greens kind of explain the course fit model in full. So we have a boost on driving distance. We have a boost on driving accuracy. We have a slight knock on approach play, a big knock on around the green play, and then putting is pretty neutral. So why do I say that the firmness kind of explains everything here? Well, the greens are so firm that you need both distance off the tee, but then you also need like height and spin control coming into these greens, both of which can be explained by how fast you can swing a golf club, but it also means that you need to be hitting fairways. So that's why you get both the boost on the predictive value for distance and accuracy. And then from there, because the greens are so firm, players just have less control. They have less control about where they miss. They have less control about whether they can actually attack pins. A lot of the time, like even if you are a long hitter in the fairway, if it's a front pin, your ball's going to land by the hole and bound 15 to 20 feet past the hole. And like, that's as close as you can get. So that's why approach play signal goes down a little bit. And then around the greens, like you're just kind of screwed sometimes, right? So you have less control about where you miss when you miss, because a lot of the time you can hit a quality shot into the green. It just bounces through, especially if you're coming from the rough, you have no chance of stopping the ball. It's going to go through the green. And a lot of the time, like you hear players talk about, you'll hear them with the caddy and they'll say, okay, well, we can't go long here. We can't go long here. A lot of the time at Riv, you have no control over whether or not you go long, because you either have to purposely miss short or it's going to end up long. So you end up with guys who are short-sighted a lot more than usual here. You end up with a lot of pitch and chip shots where you put them on a normal golf course with pretty receptive greens, and they're going to be able to stop the ball by the hole. But the greens are so firm and fast here, and then also they can, you can be short-sighted going downhill to a pin, and you just have no chance of stopping the ball. So that's why short game signal doesn't matter a whole lot. This year, though, it's going to be really soft. Like the course looks like it's been flooded almost in some places. And so we should expect more receptive greens, and the more receptive greens mean it maybe won't be as important to hit fairways. You're going to be able to hold some greens even coming from the rough. When you do have approach shots from the fairway, even the front pins are going to be accessible. And then when you miss around the green, number one, you're going to have more control over where you miss. So the short game shots that you're going to have are going to be easier. But then second of all, you're going to be able to stop the ball with height around the green. You're going to be able to spin the ball more around the green. So short game skill will matter more. It's just like a really interesting puzzle of, okay, put all this together. It's probably likely that accuracy is going to matter a little bit less than it has. It's almost certainly true that approach play is going to matter more. But I really have no idea whether around the green is going to matter more or less, because when guys have short game shots, it is going to be more predictable whether they can get it up and down or not. But they might have fewer short game shots because it's going to be easier to hit and hold the greens this week. So very interesting puzzle. Curious to hear your thoughts about it all.
Yeah, we got our guy Matt Gannon out at the course, and it rained out the first day. He got to get out there the second day with a bunch of the golfers, talk to some of the caddies, all that stuff, break it down. He said some interesting stuff that kind of, some correlate, some maybe a little bit different, but just on the high level, obviously you can go to the site at Ship It and get the Boots report, Boots Bullets. But he said, like, usually guys are grinding around the green like crazy there. Obviously he's been in the past and things like that. He said that wasn't really the case this year because it's so wet right now. And obviously that's what they're, so the mid to long irons, the wedges and spinning them in and that sort of stuff, kind of said that's what they're looking at, but said right now, as people know that have been out there, just with how wet it is, it probably takes till the weekend, right, to even get to sort of where we could get old Riv or, what we're used to there, which will matter because that's when the money lines up is on the weekend. But, getting the guys there first, it's sort of that type of stuff. And I know you were talking some stuff earlier with the approach game. And, I'm certainly looking at that as well. Like you said, like mid to long irons for the guys that are back further on those par fives, the wedges in, things like that. Is there anything else that comes to mind for you or anything with that weather report that sort of makes you think of it in another way or how you can look at a certain skill set maybe?
Yeah. So I think the other factor is the weather does look pretty extreme for tomorrow. And it's weird because like early on in the day, it could be rainy. It's going to be really cold. And it might not be that breezy. And as the day progresses, it does warm up a little bit. It looks like it dries up, but then the wind really gets there. And so I'm really curious to see what the field ends up doing. Don't yet have a good idea of how the field is going to treat this. But if the field goes one direction and says, okay, I think I'd rather have them playing in rain and cold than the wind in the afternoon, or they say, I want the warmer, drier weather in the afternoon, that could lead to a pretty big advantage. Because number one, it looks like the weather's only going to be really impactful on one of the 4 days. And so it's kind of capped of how impactful it can be anyway. But number two, like I kind of think those the elements cancel each other out, right? Like the cold and rain early balances with the higher winds late, and I don't really see an edge either way. So if the field does, then I think we could get some under-owned guys just by going the other direction.
Yeah, and even on day one, I guess like is what like what I've seen, at least a lot of people looking at like the Thursday morning stuff. There is like that short. I don't know. You look at the weather report. This morning you're seeing like a 2 to 3 hour window where it looks like they can get out, but that is the 2 hour window of like the, I don't know, Matsuyama goes out at 9 a.m. or whatever it is, roughly close to that. It's like, well, he's gonna get that window supposedly, but it's like, what about, I don't know who's right behind him, who's somebody at, Fitzpatrick is at 10:20. It's an hour and 20 minutes. Yes, it matters, but how much, and trying to figure that stuff out. I'm going to go back to a couple weeks ago.
Real quick. It is worth noting that this is the first time this year that we're not seeing split tees. We're just seeing straight tee times. So the first tee time, 10:15 local time, last tee time, 3:00 local time. So there is a wider spread this week than what we've had in the past few weeks. Also, obviously, like it's just one course instead of the two courses to start. So that I think is interesting. And it does mean that like, if the field does see an advantage to one side, then they might go with it. The other thought here, and where I do think there might be a strategy we're taking, is what if the rain early in the morning is too much rain for them to play through, and we actually get a weather delay, and now the later tee times, they're starting the event not in the heavy winds of Thursday afternoon, but in the calmer, no rain, Friday morning, and maybe they get an edge that way. So if anything weather-wise, like that's probably what I'm looking at, just to see what if they get bumped to Friday and don't have to tee it up at all on Thursday.
Yeah, certainly possible. And I think that's part of the, the plan. If you're building for that, roll that way. We talk about your lane and, our lane. If that's your lane, run with it. I think that's fine. But for me, I'll be blending. Going back to what I was going to say, is just going back to the week that we looked at. To me, it's unless you're getting these like severe winds, it's factored in. Like I said, it's built in. If anything, I'm going to look if it's being, the classic pun we always use, if it's being overblown and it's actually causing somebody else to maybe moonwalk because of this, or somebody else to steam because of this, and be like, really, do I want them at this price or this range when I could just do this? And I know you took quite a solid advantage from that last time out of being like, at the end of your final thoughts was like, man, it makes no sense. Like these guys are like 15 to 20% higher owned than the guys I actually wanted to play. And I just don't see it being significant enough. And it didn't, you ended up having tons of those lineups that did fine that week, not just yours, but saying like other people that played that way. So I think it's fine. The other thing is like Scottie is one of the later, like if you look at Rory, again, I don't have the locals in front of me, but Rory is out almost 2.5 hours, I think 2.5 hours exact before Scottie, and he's $3,000 cheaper. How does that affect things? Right now, a lot of the sites are just saying, oh, it's going to be kind of close between those guys. But does this, to our original point on this episode, talking through it, does this make it where people are like, yeah, well, I'm going to risk the weather and play the guy in the morning, and Rory saves me $3,000. And now you see Scottie come back from what we saw him be at versus that. Scottie's history, like, is it the best? He's good, obviously, but it's not great. So it's like things like that. I don't know if you see anything like that, but right now, as far as early ownership projections, again, we only have a day, but it's a Cali swing, so we have till tomorrow to tinker. I do think we still see it pretty spread out amongst early and late tee times, at least what I'm seeing right now.
Yeah, I mean, I very much agree with that. I think part of that is because at this point of the week, like people haven't even really dug into, okay, well, who's teeing off when? And so that's the kind of thing that usually gets reflected Wednesday night. But let's talk about Scottie and Rory ownership, because I don't want to like beat a dead horse by having this exact same conversation week after week, but it's true that getting the top of the board right in ownership is crucial to getting literally everything else right ownership wise. So if we can't nail down the top, we're going to be wrong, at least in some key areas the rest of the way. And so last week, what ended up happening was the field kind of viewed Rory, even though he was the defending champion, as this kind of no man's land where we mentioned it. Like, I think in the $200 single, he ended up 3.6% owned or something like insanely low like that. And Scottie was pretty much right where we had him, around 26% over at FTN. And it was because the guys who have been playing well this year just soaked up all the ownership, and people preferred balanced builds. I really don't know what people are going to do with Rory this week. So I think my question is kind of twofold for you. Number one, do you think his ownership this week steams back up because people saw how low owned he was last week and they think, oh my God, if he's going to be that low owned again, I have to use him? Or number two, do you think that his ownership was just that low because he hadn't played yet in the US this season? And now that people saw him 1 week, he played pretty good golf, made some bad mistakes, but also made a ton of birdies, that now they're just back in and he's going to be as owned as we expected him to be last week? Or do you see like the exact same thing happening? Because the weird thing about these signature events is it's pretty much like the exact same logical puzzle that it was a week ago, right? Like the vast majority of guys are playing again. The vast majority of guys are really similar price tags to what they were last week. You've got guys like Morikawa who jumped way up in price since he won. But like Scottie, Rory, Tommy, Schauffele, Henley, Hideki, like they're all basically the exact same price. The guys who are in the sevens are pretty much the exact same guys. So is it just going to be that, okay, Rory's the odd man out when it's priced like this?
Yeah, one thing I'll say for sure, again, just feels like it early on at least, is people have seen enough from Scottie now. The Rory and Tommy stuff, we kind of called that last week of like, it's just one of those things where, sometimes at those prices and the first time out and all that type of thing. But with Scottie now, I just heard way too much of like, there's, if he just plays a good Thursday, it's Scottie. He's been able to finish third and stuff without doing anything else. And the other thing is with Scottie is just going down the board. I had it here a second ago. Apologies. But if you look down, it's like whoever you want to bring into the mix, Stevens, Finau, Bridgman, Berger, Thigala, Rogers, some projection sites like, if you got Gerard is only 72, Scottie lineups are easy to build. So I would, and we're going to get there in a second. I'm not like trying to go against your question or avoid it. I'm saying, but like, I think the chalk build is Scottie this week because I think he fits fine with you do Scottie Gerard and then let's go from there. But to me, like those two just fit in so easily and people are more comfortable with some of these 6K guys. There's also people again who think of this as a non-cut, even though it is not the case. Like we talked about off the top, it's just noting that stuff. So just thinking about it off the top, that's part of it. I think Rory still comes along a little bit more, maybe even more than Tommy. I think there's always that thing of like Tommy, the best buy pricing. He needs to be like 9,900 or less to be chalk. If Tommy's 9,500 or 9,400 this week, he's really chalk because then he fits almost any type of build. At 10-3, he's going to garner ownership. It's just how much and how many people spending up to him don't just find the 1,000 for Rory. There's a lot of ways to find the Rory money. I think the bigger decision is when people have to do almost like the week, that I was against you on this. Now I'm all in on this with you. Is like, if you go Scottie, Gerard, and Stevens, that's like Rory, Hideki, and someone in the higher sevens. It's like a serious difference where more people would side to that. But because they're building the full lineup out and they've already got Scottie and Gerard and feel so comfortable, I think they still lean that way more than the other one. Well, I think it's better and you probably think it's better. It's also not as comfortable for people for the overall build when they're like, now I'm leaving off Scottie or I'm not playing Gerard or vice versa, whatever they end up doing. So long way of saying it, but I definitely think Scottie is the chalk build this week.
Okay, so then here's my next question, because I'll kind of read you the names that we have between, let's say, like 15 and 25% over at FTN so far. We've got Scottie and Rory just under 20, Tommy, Schauffele, Hideki pushing 20, Cantlay, Siwoo, Gotterup, Jake Knapp, Matt Fitzpatrick. If you are right that Scottie is the chalk build, then we are too low on him at 18% for single entries. If he's 25 to 30%, then some or most of the guys that I just rattled off are going to come in lower than we currently have projected. Of the names that I just mentioned, and I can read through them again if you need me to, who do you think slips through the cracks and ends up 10% because the Scottie steam just makes them like the field can't use all these guys, right? And so essentially what our projections are saying right now is the field has too many guys in the 8K, 9K, even low 10K range that the field really wants to play with conviction. There are too many of those guys to then also allow for Scottie to be the chalk build and to be 30% owned in single entry, something like that. If we're wrong about that, then Scottie ends up being higher. Who do you think we're most likely wrong about?
What are the names that I can use?
Rory, Tommy, Schauffele, Hideki, Cantlay, Siwoo, Gotterup, Knapp, Fitzpatrick.
I think like Tommy, Siwoo, Gotterup. I think Knapp holds, but I think those other three could just be like guys people want to get to, but maybe not as much. Like I said, the hard part for me with just going here for a second with Tommy is it's only $1,000 more. Like there's so many ways to find Rory money there. So I can't get away. I can't use Rory in that example, but I can definitely use Tommy. Siwoo, I think the problem there is too many people. I mean, Cantlay, you got to play Cantlay. Look at what he did on Sunday, and you know what his Riv record looks like. So Cantlay is a big one and done pick, which we'll get to later. Like I know he's going to be big because of that. And then you got other guys around him, like Xander's just above, Morikawa off the win, Hideki, who people sometimes like, or going down. And then going down, well, I see it kind of balanced right now between Gotterup and Knapp. I think people still choose like Knapp, Fitzpatrick. I think they go down to McNeely, Harris English, like those guys. I know those are quite different in price, 600-700 now, but just noting it, that's where I see that happening. So those would be three, at least to me, that stand out as, and not saying they get no ownership, but a little bit more held in check. I think you could see a 10 to 15 range, depending, maybe even lower in single entry versus what we currently see. And Siwoo would be one where people have been playing him, but man, are they really going to stick with him here? He's got Cantlay, Morikawa, Hideki, Xander, Cam Young, Gotterup, Knapp. He's in between all of them.
I think that they will. I'll tell you this: if they don't, I'm going to be really interested because he still projects really well, and there are a few players who, like you mentioned it briefly. This is a golf course where you end up with fewer wedge shots, so 100 to 150 yard shots than usual, and basically all of those shots go to the mid and long irons. And Siwoo is dominant with his mid irons. He's dominant with his long irons. He's like barely above average with his wedges. So he really benefits in the course fit from that perspective. So if he is one of the guys who's slipping into the cracks, I'll be interested. It's interesting. My thought is actually, if I'm wrong about Scottie and Scottie does come in 20 to 25 to 30, I think it's coming mostly from Rory and Schauffele, because I do think that there's a possibility that this current pricing where you have Rory as like this very clear tier break above all the other guys, except for Scottie. And then there's like this mindset of, okay, well, if I'm already going to go to this different tier of pricing, I may as well just go to Scottie, because at that point it's only another 3,000. And obviously like $3,000 matters a lot, but in the minds of many, I think if they're going outside of just the low 9, mid 9, super balanced builds, then they may as well get to Scottie. And so I think there's a chance that we're just going to see, as long as the pricing stays this way, that Rory's ownership is kind of capped. And that's really intriguing, especially because, yeah, he played last week, but it's not like he was dominant. It's not like he played really, really good golf. So I do think there's a chance that Rory is the guy who's just super low owned compared to where he's currently projected, if we're wrong about Scottie. And I think Xander could get the same sort of thing, because like Xander hasn't shown us much of anything except for the Zozo or whatever he won in the fall. So
the difference is, yeah, I agree. But the difference is for Xander, he's a projections darling. So he's going to show up, and especially in the balance builds, you'll be, I mean, I think for sure. I honestly think if the people don't go Scottie or Rory, I also think they're more likely to start with Xander, just because he's $9,800 and you can do whatever you want after that.
Is he a projections darling?
Oh yeah. Yeah.
He doesn't project that well for us.
Four sites right now, and
Data Golf does have him projected as one of the stronger values. So yeah,
most places do, and he fits the balanced build with those guys. So I guess that's the other thing is, like, if you are going the balanced build, I actually think it's more likely to start with Xander than anybody else. But the thing about Rory is how much that 3K gets you. So that could be what keeps Scottie in check by the end of it all. But it's like, from the chalk builds, this is the shitty part. And by the way, the funniest thing ever last week with the no Scottie market, and everyone thinking, I think I mentioned in the last one, but like, I literally never lobbied for that. It was a joke. And then they gave it to us. I think it actually defeats the purpose of the game we play and why this conversation is usually so interesting between it. But we almost have to have both of those. There's going to be a chalk Scottie build again, because it feels like it's that way. But then when you look at projections, I could easily see where the opposite build is like Xander with one other. And then you can fit English, Straka, whatever else you want to put in there. Pick an 8K guy, Knapp, Gotterup, or Fitz. Like you can fit all that. So to me, I think there's like the two builds there that will pull a little bit from each other. But what's interesting about that is Rory and Fleetwood could get squeezed again in the balance versus the Scottie builds. So I don't know how it actually ends up going, but I think it's between those two.
Yeah, now that you mentioned how well Xander projects, like there's a chance that it's Tommy who moonwalks just like he did last week, along with Rory. And last week, Tommy was the fourth most expensive, if I recall correctly, not the third most expensive. Maybe I'm wrong about that. Maybe it was the same, but yeah, that could be really interesting because we like at FTN, we have Tommy projected as the second best player in this field, and by a somewhat considerable margin, just based on how well he played at the end of last season. Now starts super well again this year. So if that's the case, if he's the one who's moonwalking, count me in. I'd be on Tommy. So
we'll talk about that, I'm sure. But yeah, let's
I think that's kind of like a large theme for me at the top is there's just not a whole lot of separation between most of the 9K range and plus Tommy plus Rory, where you tell me that any of these guys are going to end up low owned, and I'll be interested just because I don't think the odds of success for any of them are really drastically different from any other. So if one guy is being owned in such a way that his odds of success as if they were lower than everyone else's, then yeah, I'm in on that guy.
Yeah, well, a couple notes. I'm going to get to it later when I get to my lane, but just noting, like, I definitely think this is the balanced build I see as well with projections, and that's why I said earlier, like someone asked about Henley squeezed for sure here. I think Henley could be the lowest owned guy in the entire range, actually, to be honest, just because of the way the other stuff fits. Also, like I said, and if you like Siwoo and have those numbers and notes, that's something I really look for. I think that's strong. I think Siwoo's fine based off of that. I've heard everything, man. Like 6 weeks in a row, terrible course history in the past, all these different factors. The guy's playing phenomenal golf right now, had a bad week. It happens, but he could easily bounce back here, and this could set up really well for him also. So if I'm in the 9K range, I'm going to be thinking about some of those guys versus some of the chalkier options. But I will say, when you get to the balance stuff or however you're setting up your builds, Xander, Decky, Cantlay, even like Cam Young and some of those guys, like they're getting projection boosts that could lead to ownership boosts, and that makes for the 9K range being popular in a bunch of different ways. Because you can still go Rory in a 9K or like Tommy in a 9K as well. So there's 9K guys going to be used in a lot of places. So I think it's at least somewhat interesting when we get to for my lane later on. I'll talk through it then. But as far as leveraging the chalk bill, what are some of the first things that come to mind? Or like, who are some of the other guys, I guess, that you see fitting into these chalk builds? I mentioned Ryan Gerard. I think he's a super likely candidate down there. But, some of the other guys, the familiar names I talked about, English, Straka, Minwoo Lee, Kirk Kitayama, like some of those projection darlings are the guys that are fitting in and making the Scottie lineups work. And then in the 6Ks, I think you've got Finau, Stevens, Berger, Bridgman, some of those, maybe McGreevy again, like some of those names can pop up there. But what do you think?
I mean, you already said it, but like I think when we have this conversation about chalk build, like we have to have two different chalk builds, one with Scottie, one without, and with Scottie is definitely the first place to start. You're left with 7140 for the last 5 spots if you click Scottie first. So immediately when someone clicks Scottie, they're going to go look in the range around 7100, 7200. And you mentioned Ryan Gerard. I think he's going to be very popular. I think Pearson Coody is going to be really popular. Yep. So that's probably the most popular start for Scottie is Scottie, Coody, Gerard, and then that means they're going to have to go into the 6K range at least once. And so I think Thigala, Bridgman, Hisatsune, Finau, and Stevens all could get somewhat decently owned down there, especially if, again, like, so right now we have all 5 of those guys, Thigala, Bridgman, Hisatsune, Finau, and Stevens between like 6 and 10%. If Scottie is 28% instead of 18%, now those guys could be 11 to 16% instead of 6 to 10. So just yet another reminder of like ownership is so connected. Ownership is always connected, but it's never been more connected than it is right now because we have such extreme Scottie pricing. It's like if in NFL DFS, if they priced McCaffrey at $12,000 and 30% of the field still wanted to use McCaffrey every week. It's like, okay, well then what 3K wide receiver and what minimum price tight end is everyone going to? Because they're going to get owned. They have to be owned for McCaffrey to get that much ownership. So it's like you mentioned it. It's this really, really cool variable that we have to deal with each week now. And it does affect everything. But
well, that's a good point though, too, because like that's the hard part. Like, again, this show is to learn, including ourselves. Like we literally go through this stuff. It's real conversation of us thinking through it and then talking about reviewing the information we have in front of us and how we're going to apply it. I think the most interesting thing is like Scottie comes in at 20%. And then everyone's like, some are victory lapping. Oh, I thought he was going to be 16. I knew he'd be more. And then others are saying, well, these people were showing 27 and he ended up dropping to 20. We're saying to be prepared for that. And then we're working on those numbers on our own teams behind the scenes to try and get to that, because the closer you can get to figuring it out, the more you know about the rest of the build, to your point. And so like with Scottie, it's not rocket science to know that you're going to have to fit in those 7K guys and one of the 6Ks, et cetera, but it's figuring out what that looks like. And then where do those variables move if the number moves? Because in that example, if Scottie does finish out at say 20%, it's not just about like 17 versus 25 that he could have been. And somewhere in between, he finished in between that range. It's a wider range these days because of how the field's interpreting and what we're talking about. But if Xander comes in at 20, it's like, well, that's exactly what we talked about. It's like, it was kind of like one or the other. And now you start to know, and you know what either of those builds look like. It doesn't mean you have to sway completely off of either build. It just means you have to think about it and what you're doing within that build. So one of the things we talk about when how to leverage the chalk build, well, when you're leveraging the Scottie chalk build, and I've talked about this a ton, if you're going to do that in single entry, and it's in a larger field single entry, I'll use like the $12, whatever, in the $3,000 or the, what's a good example? Like the Thunderdome with 30 people and it's a single entry, kind of do whatever you want because others can make mistakes and you can kind of, leap on top of that and say, okay, I got my angle. But in something else where there's going to be a bunch of different versions of it, you playing Scottie, Gerard, and Bridgman is basically the same start as a majority of the Scottie lineups. And so when there's 1,000 lineups in that tournament, and let's say you were like, wow, Scottie came in at 17. Well, there's still 170 lineups, and there's a bunch of those that have Gerard and have Bridgman or one of those guys where you have like a 1v1 or a 2v2 in a certain spot. So it's like, you're not really doing that much different by doing that. So when I go with Scottie in those builds, one of the things I like to do is try and find good opportunities or options down below that not as many people are on. That's why, since talking with you that 1 week to every other week so far, I've liked the approach of more Scottie in MME, where I can just start flinging this stuff around him, whatever I want to get, these random options, different types of Scottie builds, different plays and options with him for overall construction differences, versus in single entry trying to peg Scottie, Yahtzee, Scheffler, like we talked about. You got to just pick the other 5 and get it right. But so many people are already on the most common versions of what that looks like, which makes it really challenging.
Yeah, there's something you talked about there, which I think is awesome, which is this idea of like, you should always be preparing for a range of outcomes in ownership. And I think this is really important to note, because, and hopefully this doesn't come across as like an excuse to someone who's doing ownership projections for being wrong about ownership sometimes. But like, when we talk about Scottie ownership, for example, it's not that we might be wrong. It's that we are acknowledging the fact that we can't possibly know where he's going to come in. Right. And the way that I'll illustrate this is like, anyone watching, ask yourself, are you 100% sure yet whether you're using Scottie or not in your main lineup? And if you're MMEing, are you 100% sure exactly what your exposure is going to be for him? It's like, we're less than 24 hours from the start of this golf tournament. If you don't know what you're going to do with Scottie, how could we possibly know what the entire field is going to do with Scottie? So it's less about like, well, we could be wrong. And I think it's more about just understanding his range of outcomes exists. Just his range of outcomes for ownership exists, just like his range of outcomes for actual golf performance exists. And understanding that when we are low on him, it's going to affect who else we're too high on or too low on. That's a really like key point when you're lineup building, because as you just mentioned, like when you use Scottie, okay, you want to find some low on guys. If you use Scottie and you say, okay, well, Max Homa is projected at 7.6%, so he's going to be contrarian. Well, if Scottie's actually 30% instead of the 18% that we have, then Homa might be 12% instead of 7.5%. Now, is he contrarian enough for you? Did you need him to be 8% or less to really feel good about him? So understanding how that is all connected, and the fact that like it's this legitimate range of outcomes, and it's not just about whether all those analysts, whether they were wrong or right about him, understanding like there's actually this very real range of outcomes that affects everything, I think is just a really key part of lineup building. And it's awesome that you kind of pointed to it right there.
Yeah, I think it's also important to remember, like we as we state on the top of every show, it's not who you play, it's how you play them. It's not who you, it's not just who you play, it's who you don't play. It's all the things that we've mentioned along the way, but that's where people get caught up. It's Scottie Scheffler. Like anyone sitting there that has a prediction, it's Scottie Scheffler. You don't have to do any conversation beyond that. It's all, notice with our conversation, it's all if Scottie Scheffler, then this. If not Scottie Scheffler, then this. What does that look like? How can you use that to your advantage? Different styles of tournaments, all these different factors. In single entry, you'll have the golfer that is the favorite to win the tournament. It's the best golfer in the field. It doesn't matter what the past, the present, any of that. It's just, that's what you'll have, the facts. But you do still have to fill out 5 other spots, and you really still got to get them there, right? And then you got to get them there with some sort of separation, because you can't just be the only guy with the same lineup as everybody else. So you're not going to want to be backed into that corner. So there's just a lot of different ways and variables to look at it. I think, we'll get there later when I get to my lane, but I think there's some other interesting points to this. Is there anything else you want to talk about with the chalk builds, in this case, plural, or how to leverage them and that sort of stuff? Because I got some stuff later, but I think it's a better conversation when we get there.
So the next thing to talk about then is what does the non-chalk Scottie build look like? And to me, it's not about figuring out which of the 9K guys are used. It's the idea that, okay, well, a lot of people are going to use Fitzpatrick at 84. A lot of people are going to use Goddard up at 88, and then it's going to be a pretty healthy mix of different 9K guys. And to me, this is why I expect Scottie to still be around 20%, maybe even a little bit less in single entries. Maybe capped at like 25% for singles, because there are just so many more options for people to be really enthusiastic about when you go to the non-Scottie build. Because in the Scottie build, like, again, you're immediately pointed to like $7,100 range. So people might feel really good about Cootie. They might feel really good about Gerard, but it's also clear those guys are going to be popular. So the highest probability plays are clearly the most owned plays down here. It's hard to feel like really excited about a low-owned Wyndham Clark or JT Poston or Max Grazerman. There are just fewer names down here that people are going to have like genuine conviction on that are also low-owned. So I think people are going to be drawn once again more towards these balance builds where you just have so many options of players that you can feel really good about, really excited about, and they're actually low-owned. And so, they're all guys that people can really feel good about having in their lineups and feel like the lineup as a whole is good and not just the play itself. So just looking at the two builds next to each other, again, I don't expect Scottie to be the chalk build.
Yeah, after talking through it a little bit more, I would say one of the things that stands out is for sure what you just said is like, again, I still think I'm personally going to lean that it's the Xander side, but that's why I brought it back into play, because I think it's like Xander, somebody else in the 9K, 2 8K guys, and then you can land on whatever you want after that. If it's Bridgman and up, if it's 7K, whatever, I actually think that's going to be more of the chalk build. And that's great for what I'm thinking on this slate, because that, it's going to have 1 to 2 9K guys are going to be in the chalk build, most likely 2, to be honest, just from breaking that down quickly. But you could see some 3/8s or whatever it is like that. But I think the most common is going to be something like that. And so, yeah, I'm good to keep it rolling. I would say to this, like, I don't know if you have any comment on this, but like, I don't know, like a second moment stat in your projections, like Scottie at 28% plus.
So that's plus minus 6%. Yes, I have thought about doing this sort of thing. It's really hard because for the majority of players, the range is just going to be plus minus the same amount. And so I find that it's actually a little bit more effective to just talk through the guys who have a wider range of outcomes than most. And the other thing is, like, if we're talking about the key being that you need to understand how the plus minus for Scottie is connected to the plus minus for Ryan Gerard, I don't just want plus minus on every single guy, because that kind of, it creates this picture that they all could be lower or higher and there's no real connection between them. So I want to draw the connections and make it easier for people to understand the connections. And I think it's easier to just then put in my article for FTN or in my slate thoughts for my Discord of, okay, if Scottie's wrong, what does that affect? If he's wrong in this direction, this guy's going to be higher. This guy's going to be higher. These guys are going to be lower. If he's lower than we expect, it's going to be the opposite. And so actually drawing those connections out, it'd be interesting to try to like actually map that out with numbers on the ownership page, but that's probably a project for another day. But that's why I don't do the plus minus, because I think it's just, that'd be like a lot of information overload, where the key information is not just the plus minus for each player. It's how the connections work between everybody.
Yeah, I'm going to show this quick just because for 2 seconds to tell people about it. Like, I'm not getting into the full, obviously, if you want, I give away my full optimizer process of what I actually do, but it's somewhere in this vicinity of what Aaron's talking about. Like, it talks about my rules, settings, all that stuff. But at the end of the day, mostly in PGA, I'm not doing that. What I'm doing is the if this, then that. If I think Scottie's going to be less and I adjust that, well, it's not just that Scottie's less. That's where I think the people miss a step, especially when you're using contest sims, which I know you sometimes are looking at and you guys have over at FTN. We've got them via Saber Sim, but I'm using the Stone. I'm getting my player pool from there. And then I'm looking at the ownership. Our ownership is great, but it's also a great place to start because you're not going to do this yourself, much like your ownership. You've got it to where you want it. Now, it's different because you do your own. Our team does ours, and then I can finagle it a little bit here and there if I want to, but just noting it, I would never just adjust Scott. First of all, it's got to add up to 600. So it's like when I take 5, if I take 5 from Scottie, that 5 has to go somewhere. But here's a problem. Most people go through and they just go, okay, 5 off Scottie, give that to Rory. Well, what do you mean? Like that changes everything. Like if Scottie's $3,000 more, it doesn't just change that. So I think for me, the main notice is like, I not only get my player pool first and put it into Saber Sim, then I'm adjusting these things. Then I'm building the field lineups off the most accurate owner, what I believe to be the most accurate ownership. And then I'm building my lineups against that. Again, that's where the differences lie, and depending on the packages you have or what you use for your own stuff. But that's the most beneficial thing to your contest sims is when you have very accurate ownership. The player projections are all median projections. It's like a Homa can say 50 right now. If he has a Homa week at Riviera, it's not likely the way he's been playing, but it's possible. It's Homa. Any given time. Look, Morikawa showed up and won last week. If he has that kind of week, it's gonna be 100 plus points. If he has a bad week and misses the cut, it could be 30 points. So it's like I'm looking way more at what the field's doing and then adjusting for that before going in and feeling good about it. So I'm fine with adjustments, but I would look at it more from that perspective, in my own perspective. So right on. What else?
Yeah, you mentioned contest sims there and like how important it is for accuracy in terms of ownership. Like I'll take it a step further and I'll say contest sims are completely useless if you can't predict ownership accurately, because in order to have like any real use from contest sims, you need to be simulating versus lineups that are similar to what your competition is actually going to use. And you have zero chance of building accurate field lineups if you can't even predict ownership correctly. Like ownership is just step 1 of building field lineups well. It's not the full piece. But if you can't even do step 1 well, you certainly can't then do step 2 well to build field lineups. So yeah, really good point there on contest sims.
Yeah. Also, why this stuff doesn't matter. I love Aaron's participation here and engagement and stuff. Like they're so limited already. The sample sizes, whatever. There's been different courses involved, different field size, different other players get better now than they were back then, and so on and so forth. It's like, yeah, it's a good thing to lean on when it's all said and done, but that's no different than when somebody says I'm buying a Marvin Mims jersey because he scored a touchdown today. I mean, we have you got some great calls on Marvin Mims this season, but just noting that it's like maybe it's the defender that slipped and made it so Marvin Mims got to the house. You should be buying their jersey and thanking them. They're the ones that caused it. Marvin Mims was dead if that guy doesn't fall. So it's like little things like that I just don't. All I care about is all the other stuff we talked about. When people dig into the picks, plays, and what's the recency bias of this guy, all the shit, it's all something, but it's all part of the puzzle. And at the end of the day, to Alex's point that he just made, if you have good projections, specifically ownership projections, even if you don't have contest sims, they're really, like you said, almost useless without that for those. But for the other side of it is like trying to build good lineups. If you don't have any clue what the field's doing and how the pieces go together, you're going to be way behind what other people are doing. It's not a sales pitch. It's a fact. Go look at the leaderboards. The same people are at the tops of them. It's no different than the top poker players that spend hours and hours in solvers and prepare themselves for these situations. Some are good at playing live and still holding up the live side of it, because then you still have to hold a poker face or bluffing or what you do in your tells and all that stuff. People are practicing that now too. It's like, that at the end of the day, if you're working on your game and you're trying to get better, there's a lot more to it that goes with it. So I don't have too much else to add on that. Do you have anything else you want to talk about with anything outside? We got one and done, the betting breakdown, and then we'll get to our lane.
Very fun betting breakdown this week. I will say that I have many more outrights this week than I might have as many outrights this week as I've had like combined in the last 4 weeks or something like that. Very much recommend going back and watching the show that Pat and I did yesterday. We talked about a specific each way type that's now available on Bet365. Actually, I shouldn't say now available. There's a chance that it's been available and I just never scrolled far enough right on the each way market to find it. But Pat asked me about a specific each way that's 1/5 of the odds for 3 spots. And so the way an each way bet works is, let's say you're betting $50 on a player. $50 is going to go to the outright just as you usually do it. Then an additional $50 will be added, this time on the placement bet. So the fraction is, okay, if he was 50 to 1, I'm now getting 1/5 of that 50 to 1. And then I'm getting 3 spots. So that'd be 10 to 1 for a top 3 as the second half of the bet that's added on to the original bet. And the reason why this one is so intriguing is because it actually takes the outright number and boosts it up. So like Scottie is, let's say he's 3 to 1 in this each way market, he might be 4.5 to 1 or something like that. And so you get a better number on the actual outright itself. And I did all the math. Pat and I talked about it. Turns out it's really good. And so I have a bunch of those bets this week. And I think my favorite one is probably Sepp Straka at 70. The guy is just continues to show us that when he plays his A game, he can beat this type of field. Not with ease, but like he's going to be in contention and just has to play his A game. He doesn't need to do something special for himself, something super rare for himself, like an out of body experience type thing to beat one of these fields. And he's also one of those guys who the more approach play matters this week, the better chance he has to win. So the fact that they should be softer greens this year than what we've seen in the past, I think really benefits him. And from in terms of like mid iron and long iron player, there are very, very few in the world who are better than he is. So I really like him this week. And that number 70 to 1 is just crazy, crazy high. And to show that point just a little more, let me bring up our prop shop over in FTN and let's see what the best available in market is just for the traditional outright. 50 to 1. 50 to 1 is the best available in the traditional market. I don't know if the number has moved in that specific each way market over on Bet365, but for anyone who's trying to find this number, you go to Bet365, you go to the tournament, you have to actually switch from main markets to each way markets and then scroll to find that 1/5 for 1 through 3 spots. And that's where you'll find the better number. So Sepp Straka 70 to 1, that's my outright of the week.
Yeah, very interesting conversation too, just because, for those like me being Canadian and those that always had access to Bet365, we've always been looking at these each way markets. I remember back in the day with my buddy Kenny Kim on the Fantasy Golf Degenerates podcast, he'd be like, yeah, you of course get these each ways, and now he's got them. So I see him betting them all the time, but they were always there. They changed it up on us. So it used to be only 1/4 top 5. And that was still fine. I'm saying, but that's all you could get. And then all of a sudden they started bringing in all these columns of different markets you could bet on. So you guys digging into that is just like us digging into DFS here. Very exciting and just unique, sort of a unique blend of sports betting mixed with DFS, mixed with everything, kind of putting it all together across these shows for yourself. But yeah, if the Sepp Straka one's nice, and he's 7,800 on DraftKings. So, if you don't want to play him there and you want to just bet him or vice versa, play him in both, you can do that. But I like the call and I like the number 70 to 1.
And the other thing is, like, I think this is a really unique thing to PGA, it seems, which is really cool that there's more of an overlap between guys who play PGA DFS and guys who bet on PGA than there is in basically any other sport. Like NBA, for example, I don't even play NBA DFS anymore, but I do a lot of betting. In football, I do both, but I find fewer other people who do both. Like even in my Discord, there are a lot of guys who just were there for the NFL DFS discussion. And then there were also guys there for the NFL props and pick'em discussion. In PGA, it seems like everyone is in on both. And that's, to me, is one of the really cool things about this PGA industry.
Yeah, it's a way to get a ton of action on something that you feel strongly about. If you're putting in the time and all that sort of stuff, again, bet responsibly. Now, don't just say it. There's no waiver disclaimer. Just of note, like I really do. I don't want people putting up more money than they can afford to lose. That's that's the problem that people run into in these Discords and things like that, where they're freaking out and over tilting and all that. Chances are, don't mean to be rude, but you probably have too much money on the line. I've got thousands on the line. It's not a brag. I'm just saying, but it's like I can afford to lose that. It's what part of my bankroll is. It's how I've always built things. I'm playing with my family. I'm about, like today, before I even get the rest of my work done, I'm going to go watch the rest of the Canada game for the Olympics. When golf is on tomorrow and throughout the weekend, there'll be more Olympics on. I'll be watching that. Like it's not make or break. I'm trying to make money and planning to, and hoping I do. Like NFL season was awesome. Golf season has not started as awesome, but it could be good. Who knows? There's a ton of time left. If you're playing all season, you have to factor that in, and you can't just sit back and say, oh, well, there's 30 events. I'm playing 30 weeks. No, there's 30 events, but that could be 4 slates a week or more to you. Because if you're just playing round 2, round 3, round 4, and you're skipping round 1, I get it, but you're still playing classic for a bunch and those other 3 slates, that's 4 slates per week. Now, let's say it's 40 events on the year with swing season and everything. Now you're playing 160 slates. You're going to lose a ton of those slates. So you just got to be prepared for that. You can't be putting up money you can't afford to lose. So, sometimes people release the beast and sometimes the beast gets released, but that's what happens. You got to be careful tilting in that Discord and coming after people on that stuff, because it's like, it's your money. You clicked send on the money and submit it. We don't want you spending more than you can afford to lose. So, all right, one and done. Let's talk about that. I think one of the most interesting things, I did want to bring this up. I know you don't want to spend too long here today, but the difference in the Mayo Cup, which is important because I'm in all these, but the Mayo Cup and Rick's Splash Sports one are quite different because of the segments, right? This first segment in the Rick Run Good one is 9 tournaments, but I believe there's only 3 or 4 left. And like this is a big one, obviously being another signature. Last week was big, but not as many people were on call-in. I just am curious, before we get to like who you like for this week as a general one and done, or with that involved, with or without that involved, what do you think about involving the segment in the conversation? Meaning, let's say you've hit duds so far. You're at $300,000 and we're already into segment 1. Then do you want to go use a Scottie or a Rory or something like that? I mean, I think I know the answer. I'm just saying, like, for others asking that, it's like they got to be cognizant of that, because it's important to note that there's other segments that you could just stack the 4 best players you have for and still get out of this thing with some money. But what's your thoughts on that? And then we'll just talk one and done in general.
Yeah, I love this question. I don't know if I'm in any one and dones that really segment it like that. But it's a really good question. And absolutely, I think you need to take it into account. And so if you're in good shape and you have a chance to, wrap up a nice payout from segment 1, go take advantage of that, because it's a long season. You have no idea how you're going to do the rest of the way. If you're in a position where you could end up with a really nice payout from segment 1, go hammer that as hard as you can, right? And so maybe that's using Scottie this week. If it goes through the players, maybe you save Scottie for the players or something like that. But if you're stinking it up this week or this year so far, and you're way behind in this segment, no, you should absolutely not use those guys unless you think that doing so is going to be contrarian enough in this week where like it could help you actually get back into the mix for the season long race. So in that case, it'd be fine. But from a segment perspective, it would certainly not be worth doing, because there are guys ahead of you who are going to use him as well. So you have absolutely no chance to go win the segment or finish well in the segment if you go and use those studs right now. So really good question. I don't think I have like any strong feelings yet this week for one and done in terms of who I want to use. Do you?
I'll have a thought here to say, I like Aaron caught this one. So shout out to him. Be cognizant the week before. Yeah, the tournament's upcoming, so that's going to be part of the segment as well. But I think that at the end of the day, you said a really good point there that was added on of also, like, if you have capitalized on a segment, meaning you got Morikawa right and you got something else going in your favor, you got to get after it this week. Not only is it great anyway, to Aaron's previous point of like this week is huge prize pool, and basically it's like the players, but that's for any one and done. We're talking Mayo Cup, like you said, and it's like every event counts. Yeah, get who you think's going to win the money, but most certainly if you're in a segment contest like Rick Rungood's big one on Splash, you should be focused on where you stand right now. And I wouldn't burn anybody if you're way behind. Save it for bigger segments, and you're still going to need somebody that does well. You want to collect money, don't get me wrong, but I'm just saying you don't need to pick the top tier that you might be able to use to your favor later. Vice versa, if you're in a good spot and you got Colin right, you got other stuff right, I would try and get as much as you possibly can rolling it out that way. I guess my question is, where are you thinking early that people are landing? I definitely think people are landing on Cantlay. I brought that up earlier just because of history and all these other factors, and he definitely showed some signs. By the way, I'll just note this because you brought up the Rose thing earlier. Cantlay to me is like a little bit reminiscent of the Rose thing. Like Rose, it was like age and different factors. Like, well, he's playing good now. When are we going to save him for it? Makes sense, et cetera, et cetera. Cantlay, he just had himself a good week. He had a really good round 4. He crushes it here. He's been fine before. Let's jump on him now. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, just noting why it's a popular thing it does sort of bring that into play. I think almost like how the Rose situation did last week.
Yeah, his iron play has really been surging so far this year. So I'm with you. I think he's going to be one of the most popular one and done picks. That to me, like, kind of excludes him because he's not popping at all in our models, particularly in our simulations. Like his projection is solid, but he's one of the lower volatility players now among the best players in the world. So the win odds, the top 5 odds, just don't compare to some of his peers up there, at least in our simulation. So I won't be going there. But like I said, I don't have anyone that I feel like really good about. I think maybe the guy who's the most interesting to me is Russell Henley, because he is so like polar opposite of the type of player that you think of when you think of a Riv specialist, but he's just a good enough player to have real win equity. And we've seen him win on courses, or at least contend on courses where like his game just doesn't fit what most guys have to do well to play well there, because he can play his own game and just play it that well that he actually contends and even wins like he did at Bay Hill. So you mentioned the fact that he could slip through the cracks and be one of the lowest owned guys in DFS. I think he could also do the same and be one of the really low owned like stars from a one and done perspective too.
Yeah, another thing I wanted to add too, though, and that's a great call. I like that one. Another guy, just an example, would be like Sam Burns. He showed up last week like Cantlay did. He's been, 2 years ago when they were here, he was 10th. Like he's obviously a guy that, I guess my thoughts on guys like Henley and Burns. I know we had the conversation earlier in the season, so I'm interested to hear your rebuttal to this, but like everyone that got the Goddard up wins now, plural, right? Yep. They weren't for the biggest money, but they were wins. That's for the biggest money you could possibly get that week. The way to get after those people now is to get Goddard up winning on a week like this for all the money. But outside of that, let's say a guy like Goddard up, him who we just talked about, or Knapp, it's like they're going to probably get tournaments down the stretch where they are the favorite, or like the 2-1 or 3, they're like the top 2 or the top 3 favorite in the tournament. You're not always, I know sometimes you will, but like with Henley and Burns and that sort of stuff, it's not always guaranteed because sometimes they don't always play in those crossovers where like those other guys will. So I'd be more likely to go with, to your point, Henley. You could go with the Burns. Another guy you could go with who people usually don't go back to the well, but is Morikawa, right? Just go right back to the well. Morikawa, he won last week. There's no way he can win again this week. So I don't know. What's your thoughts on that? But he also only plays big boy events too. So when else?
I was bringing up Morikawa next. So I think we should probably go ahead and toss Morikawa in for our joint entry, because I think it's a really sharp play. Yeah. And I also think he's potentially good on DraftKings. Like that was another kind of thing I actually meant to bring up earlier, and we should have touched on is, do you foresee the Morikawa like post-win ownership discount coming for him, especially considering the fact that his price went up by, what was it, like $1,600 versus last week? So do you think he's going to be really low owned, or are people now just totally backing on him?
I think they're out on him. I think it's he won. Good for him. Now his price went through the roof. It's like he's definitely not going to win again. And then the problem is just where he is. Xander, Decky, can't just use Xander and Cantlay wrapped around them. I don't care about the rest. Like Decky could be in there too, but just use Xander and Cantlay alone. He's in between them. So how can people get to it? Then you've got the Rory ownership, the Scottie ownership that won't just dip right to him. It's not going to be, you're not going to see a bunch of Tommy Morikawa lineups. You know what I mean? Something like that. So yeah, I just don't see how he gets out of control. Will he get 10% maybe? Yeah. But where do we go? Is it 8 to 12 or something? Is it 9 to 14? Like, I don't know what range you want to give him, but I don't see a world where he gets like pumped up or anything.
It also means like you could go Henley Morikawa for basically the same price as Schauffele Cantlay. I think they probably project slightly better for us. No, ever so slightly worse, but you're getting a massive ownership discount compared to that chalkier pairing. So that's a really cool angle at the top. I think Morikawa is a really sharp play, particularly for DFS, but I think he also works here for one and done.
Yeah, I like that call, man. All right, I'll do my lane first because I feel pretty strongly about it, so it's good. No 9K in my main single entry, and the main thing is like everything we've been talking about. Like I said, it actually feels even better knowing that is if it'll be one of Scottie, Rory, or Tommy that I'm using. Obviously, in this case, I'm not just going to go all 8K guys or something. I'm talking about using a guy above them. But when you've got Xander, Decky, Kawa, Cantlay, Young, all these guys that we talked about, I can see a bunch of them being 15 to 20%, and some of them even higher when you get to the single entry stuff. Like we kind of figured out with the chalk build stuff there. So I'm happy just to skip that range and, go down, whether I do Fleetwood and multiple eights and land in just a completely different zone, or if I do Scottie with a build that I like and I find something down there where I can get upper sixes or upper sevens, mid sixes or something like that. Like there's a ton of different ways you can go here that I feel comfortable with this week. So I'll alleviate myself of the FOMO. There's definitely always going to be a fear of missing out when you're leaving out all those 9K guys. But in my main $200 single entry, I'm not going to play any of them. I've got multiple builds I've looked at this morning that don't require any of those guys.
For my leverage lane, I'm going to test my luck with this, with the thought that we kind of started with on the Rose team last week. We're going to see how much of an impact we actually have here, because I'm going right back to two buy low guys, JJ Spawn, Corey Connors. These are two guys who, if you started this season back in January, and let's say DraftKings like released all of the pricing for the next 2 months every single week, you'd look at the pricing this week and you'd say, wow, why would they put Connors and Spawn at $7,000 and $7,500? They're going to be 30% owned each by the time we get to that part of the schedule. But they haven't played well, and Spawn had an injury concern. So here he is at this low ownership. But the thing with Spawn is his ball striking was really, really good last event. His ball speed is actually up compared to his baseline. So that to me says, you know what, he's healthy. So I'm very much in on him at $7,500. And then Connors, it's not the same story, but it's a similar story in the fact that he hasn't played well. But the thing with Connors is he's only played 3 times this year. He started at the Sony. His irons were spectacular. Now he's had 2 straight events, 6 total rounds where the irons haven't been good. No part of his game has been good. The putting has predictably been bad, but we know that sometimes he isn't going to putt horribly. And usually when he does that, the ball striking is good enough that he gets in contention. And I just think that the last 6 rounds pale in comparison to the long, extensive history that we have from Connors as being one of the better iron players in the world, one of the better drivers of the golf ball, at least from an accuracy perspective. So I'm in on Corey Connors this week in what I think is as much of a buy low opportunity as we get on players of his caliber at price tags this cheap. So that's my leverage lane, is the combo of Spawn and Corey Connors, and more just like the idea of buying low on players that we have extensive histories, that we know these guys are significantly better players than their current price tag and their current play. And in addition to the price discount, we're also getting an ownership discount.
We're going to coin it the Blickle trickle. We'll see if the trickle effect you hops in where people follow you and, each little trickle of ownership gets added on. And eventually, man, Spawn and Connors can't get ownership here unless they do. And so that's the case. That would have to be from you. So I love it. I like the bold call. It's, you're hitting on 2 value plays that people can use in many different ways. You could play them again. You don't have to pick. You could play them with Gerard. You could play them instead of Gerard. They're all right there, but he's putting them together and building something out for you. So I like that. I like the breakdown on everything you did there. Anything else to add?
Yeah, I love the Blickle trickle, because hopefully it is just a trickle. As long as it's just a trickle of ownership that's coming in, I don't care at all. And just don't give me the big waterfall of additional ownership on those guys. Because if I open the DraftKings app on tomorrow morning and see 15% on those guys, I'm going to throw my phone across the room.
Yeah, I got to say again, thank you to Aaron. He was the comment we talked about a couple of weeks ago, but I mean, you're not new here by this point. If you're looking for picks and plays, absolutely the wrong place. And the show does quite well every week. I think people are starting to understand the game that we play, but who cares? They're just people that are going into lineups. Like you're going to put them in. I'm going to build lineups, and whoever lands in them is who lands in them. But I think that's important to remember. Worrying about a pick or a play is a result effect after the fact. If they have good weeks, you needed them, but build your lineups accordingly and think about this stuff. Go ahead.
Well, this is also not the show for course history. We're not going to talk much about course history. So, and look, I think it's not surprising. It's actually a really interesting combo of guys that you just brought up, because Cam Young and Victor Hovland historically are 2 of the best drivers of the golf ball on tour. As we've talked about, though, Victor Hovland, at least right now, is not that. Hovland's driving is really what's holding him back. Right now, we actually have Hovland projected to lose strokes to this field in both driving distance and driving accuracy. We still have Cam gaining in both. He's still great off the tee. So his course fit by no means is bad this week. It is interesting, though. He's not very good with his long irons. So It's surprising that hasn't hurt him as much. Now, that can be a factor of he hits the ball so far that maybe he gets fewer long irons than most, and he's mostly in the mid iron category where he's very capable. So that part's interesting, but the Hovland one especially, historically, he has been a great fit for this golf course. Also, remember the fact that around the green is significantly less predictive than usual here. That makes Hovland a great fit. So in that regard, he's still very solid, but you need to drive the ball well here. Even though it's going to be softer this year, I expect that to still be true, at least to some degree. So Hovland is definitely not the same fit this year for the golf course that he's been in the past, because he just can't figure out the driver. I mean, last week he spent like 3 hours on the range after one of his rounds trying 20 different drivers or something like that, and then still stunk the next day off the tee. I don't think it's a driver issue. I think it's a swing issue. And until I see him driving the ball well again, I think he's going to struggle, because the worse he drives the ball, the less he can take advantage of the fact that he's probably the second best iron player in the world, only behind Scottie. And on top of that, the worse he drives the ball, the more situations he's going to put himself in where he can't hit the green, and he does have to rely on his poor short game. So I really need to see him driving the ball before I'm back in on him.
Yeah, our man Matt Gannon at the course. Again, checked out a little Viktor Hovland yesterday. You guys can find it if you're a member at the site under Boots Bullets. You want to know exactly what it says? These are bullet points, so it's very straightforward. Not at all in control with the driver. So still not there. Whether that matters or not, we'll see. It's anything. I think an interesting thing would be, to your point, of the around the green game with Viktor usually being a thing and something that's important. Well, if it's not for the first couple of days, we could easily see Viktor start hot and then fall apart over the weekend as the things firm up a little bit or whatever it might be. If that happens, where that would be a bit of a problem. But yeah, like I said, it's not going to be a course history thing or anything like that we're looking at it from that perspective. Look at your builds, play your lane. If I was looking at my stuff, I would probably include them in the pool, but for my main single entry, I'm going to be skipping right over that range, particularly those two. If I in that range, I definitely like some of the other guys better anyway. So just little things like that throughout. So, all right. I don't have too much else to add, man. If you guys want to go over to Ship It Nation, you can get in. We got the early bird special, includes Saber Sim for the entire season. You can go into the Discord. You get the projections, ownership, the stone, Boots Bullets, Boots on the Ground report that Matt will have out later today. Alex, did you have anything else you want to add? Obviously, you got your Discord, FTN. Hit them up where the people can find you, and then we'll get out of here.
Yeah, find me at Alex Blickle 1 on Twitter, and you can get all FTN stuff or my Discord stuff from there. Promo code Leverage for my Discord, 10% off forever. Promo code Blick at FTN Fantasy for 10% off.
The Blickle trickle, baby. We're back on it. That's another one too. A good bullet, actually. Brought his dad with him this week. Obviously, they always talk about it. What is it, like Sleepy Hollow or the Course Pro? I forget the name of the course now, but it's something like that in New York and all these different factors. But one other just funny thing I saw while we were on here, I think it was, forget who posted it, but anyway, Brendan Porath. Yeah, I think, it was Brendan Porath or whatever his name is, the golf reporter guy. But anyway, he posted it, and Vic Hovland posted on his Instagram, like SMH ... shaking my head. And there's a huge tree on 15 now where he used to come through. The tree's all up there now. It's like, you ain't doing that this week. That'd be a very bad idea. I don't know. Maybe he'll try and fly it over, but highly doubt it. So right on, guys. Appreciate you. Always a lot of fun doing these shows. Appreciate Alex for hopping on with me every week and getting this done. Make sure to hit that thumbs up. If you're watching it on mobile, just click the little X on the chat, hit the thumbs up, subscribe to the channel. We'll be back this time next week, 10:30 a.m. Eastern. For Alex and for myself, ToeTagginTambo. Let's ship it.